is
Okay.
going to be on Sunday. If you live in Jerusalem, or if you live in Gaza, which is also was a walled city at the time of Joshua, that is also observes Shushan Purim. And I just learned today, and my husband already knew this, but I just learned today that if you can see a walled city, then you also observe Shushan Purim. There's a kind of a machloket, there's a debate. And since Jericho, we know, was a walled city, because we all learned the song that Joshua fought the battle of Jericho and the walls came tumbling down, Jericho was also a walled city. So if I were to walk down to Jericho, where I would not be welcome at this moment to celebrate, I would celebrate a Shushan Purim there too. But since we can see it from our patio, we're not observing. Mitzvah Yericho does not observe Shushan Purim, but there is a debate about whether it could or should, because we can see what would have been the walled city of Jericho. So it's just like a fascinating concept. And the soldiers who are in Gaza will observe Shushan Purim because they are in a walled city. So it's just very interesting. Etta, yes.
Just a question. How is it usually observed? Is it
Shushan
also
Purim? It's the exact, what we do on our Purim day, they do the following day. They do not observe on they will not observe on Sunday, they observe on Monday. Everything that we do on Sunday, they do on Monday.
Who?
To anyone who's in a walled city, if you're in Jerusalem, or if you are in a city that was walled at the time of Jericho, at the time of Joshua entering into the land of Israel.
So the Seudah is on Monday for people that are in walled cities or can see a wall.
Yeah, so I just mentioned that to see the walled city there's a machloket in the Gemara about that. It's Yerushalayim and Gaza, because those are walled cities. Those are walled cities.
Have a Seudah on Monday, and we should have it on Sunday, lunch.
Correct. Everyone unless they live in Jerusalem or are living in Gaza, will be celebrating and having their Seudah on Sunday.
That's so that has to have meat, I think you said years
preferably
ago.
Whatever, unless you're a vegetarian, it's preferable to have meat and wine. It's supposed to be a festive Seudah. It's a festive celebration. We are celebrating the fact that we were not wiped out and that Hashem saved us. So we are going to talk today about Purim, and we're going to talk about what I mentioned in my message to all of you in the subject line, which is that we don't ever take leave completely of Purim. So here's so fascinating. When we have a holiday, when we have Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah, when we have Purim, when we have Pesach, when we have Sukkot, when we have Shavuot, when those holidays are over, just like with Shabbat, we make Havdalah, and the holiday is over. And we say, Bein Kodesh L'chol, Bein Or L'choshech, between the ordinary and the holy, between the 6 days and the 7th working days. We make a distinction and we leave the holiday and we go back to the regular time of the week or of the year. However, we do not make Havdalah after Purim. And you may want to wonder why. So one of the reasons we don't make Havdalah after Purim is because Purim is not one of the holidays that has the restrictions that the other holidays have. Pesach, Sukkot, and Shavuot, and Shabbos all have the restrictions that are like Shabbos, where we don't drive, we don't do malacha. So what we're separating is we are separating from a holiday that has those kind of restrictions back to where, as you can say, back to where you can drive. So if it's a holiday where you can drive, you don't make Havdalah. If it's a holiday where you don't drive, you do make Havdalah. So the question is, how did Purim end up being a holiday where you can drive? And the question is very interesting because it goes back to the people of Shushan at the time. That they were, and I have to tell you, I do not remember where the source for this, if it's in the Midrash or the commentary, that says that Mordechai and Esther asked the people, we're going to have a holiday. Do you want it to be a holiday like Sukkot, Shavuot, or Pesach, like that kind of a holiday, or not that kind of a holiday? Now remember, this was before Hanukkah. Okay, so this was before Hanukkah. So this was like a holiday that was getting established. What kind of holiday should it be? And they were like, no, we don't want it to be a holiday like Sukkot, Pesach, or Shavuot. Now you might think that they said that because we don't want another holiday with restrictions. Like that wasn't the reason. The reason they didn't want to have a holiday that would be like those other holidays is we don't ever want to make Havdalah and leave the holiday. If you have a holiday where you make Havdalah, then the holiday is over. We don't want Purim to ever be over. Have you ever had something that you were experiencing that was so wonderful that you didn't really want it to end? It's like, that's the holiday of Purim. The Purim is like, no, we don't want it to end. We want to stay in Purim. How do we know that we stay in Purim all the time? That we never actually leave it? It's like, we actually refer to Purim every single end of Shabbos. When we make Havdalah on Shabbos, it's like, just so you know, we may be making Havdalah on Shabbos, but we're not leaving Purim. We're still going to have Purim for the coming week. How do we know that? So if you go to a Havdalah, and you can find this, you'll need to find it in whatever Siddur you have. If you happen to have a women's art scroll Siddur, it's on page 605. And at the beginning of the service for Havdalah, it's Hine El Yeshuati, behold, God is my salvation. I shall trust and not fear, for God is my might and my praise. And it goes on and has a series of different verses that come from Isaiah, from Psalms, from different number of different Psalms. And then what's thrown into the mix is La Yehudim Haita Ora V'Simcha V'Sason V'Kar. For the Jews, there was light, gladness, joy, and honor. Where is that from? That is from the Megillah. That is from Esther, and the source is chapter 8, verse 16. And every single week, we refer back to the Megillah, and that verse, when was that said? That was said at the end when everything was turning out right. So if you have your Chumash with you, we're actually going to turn to that place in the Megillah. So in the Chumash, the Megillahs are in the back, and on page 1259, and you will see on the left-hand column, it is highlighted because it is said out loud along with its accompanying verse. It's chapter 8, and you'll see that both verse 15 and 16 are highlighted because they are said out loud by the entire congregation. What does it say here? Verse 15, Mordecai left the king's presence clad in royal apparel of turquoise and white with a large gold crown and a robe of fine linen and purple. Then the city of Shushan was cheerful and glad. Verse 16, the Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. Likewise, in every province and every city, where the king's command and his decree reached, the Jews had gladness and joy, a feast and a holiday. Moreover, many from among the people of the land professed themselves Jews, for the fear of the Jews had fallen on them. And what happened then? It goes into chapter 9, where the Jews are going to go and they gained the upper hand over their adversaries. And when was it that they had this joy and gladness and honor? This was before they went out to hang Haman's sons, because look and see what happens on the next page, 1260. They went out, Mordecai was now prominent, the Jews struck all their enemies, and you see the list of Haman's sons, etc. And that is before the battle takes place. So what happens is like, that's really strange. The Jews were celebrating that they had light and joy and honor and gladness. This is before the battle. And it says in the past, La Yehudim Haita Ora. And there was, the Jews had, not that they have right now or that they will have, but the light and the joy and the honor was already there. Haita, and it was that they already had it. Like, wait a minute. Shouldn't this verse really be at the end of the Megillah? What verse is it in? It's chapter 8, verse 16. The Megillah goes to chapter 10. You'd think this would be the grand finale. This isn't the grand finale. This is when the tables turn, where the shift happens. Mordechai goes out, but they haven't prevailed yet. They've just shifted, and the mindset of the Jewish people is now on track. And for the Jewish people, there was light and gladness, joy and honors. Like, you didn't win yet. What are you celebrating? What are they celebrating? They're celebrating that they now know and have clarity about God's presence, the reality of what they're supposed to be doing, and they are prepared to go out and fight and defend themselves. And what do we say at Havdalah? We're getting ready to go out into the week that we are getting ready to face. We don't say this on Friday night as we're going into Shabbos. We say this as we're getting ready to leave Shabbos and we're going into the week with all of its challenges. Redemption, full redemption has not happened yet. But what do we say? LaYehudim hayta or v'simcha v'sason vikar. And then we add a little phrase, Kain tihiyeh lanu. So shall it be for us. As we go into this week, we need to remember the mindset that the Jewish people had facing all of the challenges and adversaries and everything that they were going to encounter as they move forward into the next step of prevailing. And just mind you, when the Purim story ends, the Jewish people are still in exile. They're still living under the authority of King Ahasuerus, who was an evil person. Esther is still basically a hostage in the palace, and I use that word in its full meaning. She is still a royal hostage in the palace. The Jews are in exile. It's like, we're not exactly there yet. And yet we are celebrating. We are celebrating for where we are and for having clarity of our mind and knowing what it is, remembering who we are. Because remember, the Jewish people, Haman described us. We are separated and far flung, completely had assimilated into the Persian culture. You know, we went to Ahasuerus's feast where he was celebrating that the Jews didn't go back and rebuild the temple, and he was using the vessels, all those vessels that we spent all those weeks talking about just recently on the building of the Mishkan, all those things that had been brought and had more things had been made for the building of the temple. The temple had been destroyed now in Jerusalem. The Jews had been exiled. There had been a prophecy that we would return after 70 years. According to Ahasuerus, that prophecy didn't come true. He was celebrating. It said he came wearing the outfit of the Kohen Gadol, of the high priest. Can you imagine what that was like for the Jewish people to see the likes of Ahasuerus wearing the outfit of the Kohen Gadol and drinking from his depraved orgy type party of drinking from the vessels from the Beit HaMikdash? It was such a complete Chilul Hashem, desecration of God's name. And what does it say? It says the Jewish people sat at that party, and did they cry and go like, did they say, oy vey, this is a shanda for the goyim? It says they enjoyed themselves. How could they enjoy themselves? They enjoyed themselves because they had assimilated and they had lost faith. We're not going back. It's all over. You might as well just enjoy. You know, just enjoy. It was considered actually the biggest sin ever, that they enjoyed it. Okay, if you were commanded, you had to go, so go. If you have to go, like if it's your life, give your life or go to this party. Okay, so go to the party, but you didn't have to enjoy it. And the fact that they enjoyed it was the kind of the last straw. It says, and it was their enjoyment that triggers the events of the decree against them. It's like, well, let's just see what your identity is really up to these days. So when the Jewish people are now in chapter 8, verse 16, LaYehudim hayta ora v'simcha v'sason vikar, is like the lights went on. Clarity of purpose, clarity of identity. We know who we are. And it's it's not irrelevant. It's almost irrelevant whether they're going to prevail militarily or not. Because what's the most important thing? They realized who they were, and they were back on track. And they had regard for Mordecai, who they thought had caused the whole problem. Well, if you would have just bowed, now you got us all in trouble. It's like, it wasn't the bowing. It was the enjoyment at the party. It just looked like the bowing was the cause. That was not the cause. The cause was the enjoying at the party. Once they are on track, it says, this is what we need to carry with us. This was like, no, now we are ready to see who we are, to put ourselves in the right place, to fight for our deliverance, to protect our bodies, and we are spiritually in the right place. And that was considered the most important thing. And we say every single week, every week. Do you know how many verses there are in the Bible? There are more beautiful verses that we could recite. We could say something from King David, from Tehillim. We could say something from Moshe. We could say 1,000,001 other statements. But what's the statement that we say as we go into our week that we must know? And we say it out loud at Havdalah, just like we say it out loud for the Megillah. So this Saturday night is going to be really interesting. We're going to say, La Yehudim Haita Ora Simcha V'Sason B'Ikar V'Kein Tiyeh Lanu. We're going to say that when we make Havdalah. And then we're going to go back to the synagogue, hear the Megillah reading, and we're going to say it again in its source place in the Megillah. So that's probably really helpful, because maybe like the dots will connect for us and say like, oh, I didn't leave Purim. I left Shabbos, but I didn't leave Purim. I'm still there from last year. And every single week, lest we think that we have left it, we have not left it. Having this communal davening, whatever time it's going to be and whatever time zone you're in, the davening, the Shema Yisrael is like, this is like for the Jewish people to get our heads in the right place before we go into Purim, before we enter into this very real holiday of facing a decree of extermination upon us, that there are those who want that, and God forbid it should be successful. We have to know who we are. When we have that, it says that is what creates the success. We think the success is coming from this government or that government or this plan or that plan. It's not really coming from there. That's the storyline. Like the Megillah has a storyline. That's on the surface. Behind the scenes, what's causing things to happen is, where are the Jewish people? That's why we're doing this. Otherwise, we'd say, everyone go get your gun, which people are doing that too. Get your gun. But it's like, no, what we have to do is make sure of where the Jewish people are and where each of us is in having our mindset of understanding the unity of God, which is why we're saying Shema Yisrael, and why we're coming together, the unity of the Jewish people. When we understand those two things, that is what allows us to be successful. That's what will allow us to prevail. So we're never leaving Purim, and every week we start a new week saying, I have clarity, I have this light, this is what's guiding me, and we're not there yet. Etta.
Just a question. I've heard that in the times of Mashiach, the only holiday that will be kept is Purim. There'll be more Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah and Passover. Well, I don't know about Rosh Hashanah, but Purim is the holiday. Is that true?
Yeah, that's right. So, and one of the things for us to understand is it says that the other holidays will be mevatel, which means that they will be, not that we won't have them, but they will be, what's the word mevatel? In English, I'm like, what's the English word for mevatel? They will be, what's the word? Why I can't even think of it.
Annulled.
Okay, so it's not exactly annulled. Exactly, it's that they are. It's almost like they're dissolved in. So mevatel. So in an appointment. So I did not learn this, but I'm trying to get an appointment, and I want to see if there's a cancellation. I ask if there is somebody who has mevatel. Did somebody cancel their appointment?
Right.
But
Yeah,
it means that it so like if you have milk that accidentally falls in your chicken soup, the milk is mevatel in your soup. If it's less than 1/60th of an amount, it's still there. So what it's saying is those other holidays are going to be there, but because of the enormity of the light that's going to come from the ultimate redemption, if you have the ultimate redemption, then the light of Pesach is diminished because it's so small compared to the ultimate redemption. So in that way, the holidays are going to be, they're going to be smaller, but not the light of Purim. It says the light of Purim is for eternity. That stays forever. What's the other thing we have to Purim every week for when we end and have Havdalah? It's really fascinating. Again, I've listened to this share and I apologize. I was listening to it while I was doing other things and I did not write it down. I've been very distracted. That when we make Havdalah, that you can't make it over one flame. You must have at least 2 flames. Okay, so those 2 flames are actually attributed to Mordechai and Esther. They were putting the flames of Mordechai and Esther together, and that they represent our Havdalah torch that is leading us into the new week. Why is it Mordechai and Esther, and why all this Purim is? Purim is the only holiday that is an exile holiday. Now, there were other holidays that we didn't have that weren't created in the land of Israel, like, for example, Pesach. Obviously, we were leaving Egypt, so by definition, we weren't there yet. Sukkot, we were in the Midbar, we were in the desert, and Shavuot, we were receiving the Torah in the desert also. But all those holidays were like on the way. They're redemption-oriented holidays. However, Purim is the holiday that comes from post-destruction of the temple and is observed and created in exile. So it's called Galut. It's a Galut holiday, which is what we all are. We are all in Galut, including the Jewish people who are in the land of Israel. So, which contemporary issues show, we do not have sovereignty in the land of Israel. We do not get to call our own shots here. We are dependent on the nations of the world. So we are still in Galut also. So, which is why at our Seders in Israel, we also say, even if you are having a Seder in the old city of Jerusalem, you will say, L'shana haba'a b'Yerushalayim habnuya. Next year, may we have our Passover in the rebuilt Jerusalem, because we're not there yet. We're all in Galut. We are all in Galut. We are all in exile. And with that, we have Mordechai and Esther, who symbolize the exile leaders. They're the ones who are able to function in exile while keeping their eyes on the prize and their mind on the rebuilt Jerusalem, on the return of the exile, of returning. They were the ones who were able to get the Jewish people awakened from their slumber and their despair of, like, we're not even sad anymore about the destruction. We already gave up. We enjoyed Achashverosh's party. It's like, it doesn't mean anything to us anymore. And when something no longer means anything to you, then you're really in a bad space. If you're still pining away, that means there's hope of return. If you're no longer even pining away or thinking about it, it doesn't mean anything to you anymore, then that's really a problem. So that was the problem. And Mordechai and Esther were the ones who woke the Jewish people up. So as we go into our week, we take those 2 flames, because what is that Havdalah flame? Is the light, that's a torch that leads us forward and onward into the week. We take Mordechai and Esther with us. And there's more. What else? What do you use for your basamim? What do you use for your spices? Usually most people use, many people use what we use. Anybody can? Cloves, right? They last really long, cloves. You take cloves, most people have that as their basamim. You can use whatever. You can use cinnamon, you can use anything like that. But what is considered a really good basamim that our sages say one should use? is myrtle, our hadass leaves. Why hadass? Remember the hadass from the lulav and esrog? That's the one that smells really sweet. But why are we doing that? Not because it smells sweet. I mean, yes, it smells sweet, so you can say it, but hadass is who? That's Esther. Okay, her name was Hadassah. So we have Hadassah, Esther, that we're smelling her fragrance. And then now we have Mordechai and Esther between our two flames. We're saying out loud, everyone who's there, not just the person who's leading the Havdalah, Layehudim Haita Or V'Simcha V'Sason Bikar Kain Tia Lanu. We are having a mini Purim experience every time we end Shabbos and go into our new week, because that's what we need to guide us through the stage that we are in, our very, very long history. Any questions just about that? Okay. So, yes, Patricia.
Where do you get myrtle leaves, or what? Do you have those handy in Israel, or?
People do. In fact, I think in some Sephardi shuls. In fact, one time for one of the women's trips, we were in the hotel and there was another group that was there having a Shabbaton, and we kind of joined in their Havdalah, and they passed out myrtle leaves. And so I don't know where people are getting it, but you can get it, but I don't know. I haven't seen them. That was news to me of having myrtle, of having the hadass.
Isn't myrtle one of the 4 things at Sukkot?
Yes, that's the hadass. So
maybe you could dry it and I don't know.
Yeah, maybe you could just keep it and dry it, and then just rub it, and then so you can smell it. That's a really good idea, is to keep it for your Havdalah. So I think that's really fascinating, because so many people think, first of all, many people think that Purim's kind of like a made up holiday, and they think it's like based on a myth, and they think it's for children, and they think it's like not relevant to them. It's like, that's interesting. How can we have our whole Havdalah focused on Purim, that whole thing? Please translate Layehudim. So look in your chumash right there, and it says right there, the Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. Layehudim, to the Jews, Haita Ora Simcha V'Sason Bikar. And then we add Kain Tihiyeh Lanu, which means yes, so may it be for us. May we have what they had then and there. May we have as we go out, not at the end of the Purim story where everything worked out. Before, this is what they needed in order to engage and go out into their week, not when they were sitting back afterwards and it was all over. This is like, what do I need? What are my tools for success as I enter into my week in an exile world? You need Mordechai and Esther. You need the smell of the hadass, which, okay, if we can't find it, that's fine. You can just even think about it, or take Patricia's idea if you still have your hadass from Sukkot, and those 2 flames, just thinking about that. And when we say this out loud, and every person says it, usually that's not done. Usually when somebody is leading something as like a prayer, it is not, what's on Amazon? You can get myrtle on Amazon. There you go. Okay, you can get myrtle on Isn't Amazon amazing? Who knew? Okay, you can get it. So I find this so fascinating, because it's like, what do I need? What's the spiritual energy that I need to hang on to, and that I can kind of connect myself to when I go into my week? What makes Mordechai and Esther so special? So this is actually from another shir, let's talk about who they were. And we have to go back into their lineage. So we know that Mordechai and Esther are related. Okay, Mordechai and Esther, thank you. They grow in the southern US. Mordechai and Esther are related. They are both from the tribe of Binyamin. Mordechai is described when he is introduced. We can take a look at this in the Megillah. It's another line that we say in the Megillah. If you go back to page 1253, chapter 2, verse 5. there was a Jewish man in Shushan, the capital, whose name was Mordechai, son of Yair, son of Shimi, son of Kish, a Ish Yemini, a Benjaminite. Okay, he's from the tribe of Benjamin, and we know that Esther is actually his uncle's daughter, which makes her his cousin, even though we always say he was older than she was, but they were cousins. Okay, your uncle's child is your cousin. Okay, that's pretty clear. We understand that. But he was older and he adopts her because she was orphaned. Okay, so they are both, because Mordechai's brother, by definition, would be the same tribe as him, which is Benjaminite. Okay, so they are from the tribe of Benjamin. Whose child is Benjamin? If you remember, from the tribe of Benjamin, whose tribe, whose child is he?
Rachel.
Rachel, okay. And we know that Rachel died in childbirth with Benjamin. So Benjamin represents, and when Rachel died, she represents, it says that she died and she was buried on the road. She was not buried in the Ma'arat HaMachpelah, the cave of Machpelah, and with all the other matriarchs and patriarchs. It's a little bit of a, it says Rebbetzin Yemima Mizrahi. This is actually a quote from Shira Smiles. This is Rebbetzin Mizrahi describes Rachel as being the kimat, which means almost. She's the almost person. She almost got to marry Yaakov first, except that she gave the codes away to Leah. She almost got to be the mother of 2 children, but she died in childbirth, didn't even get to enjoy her son Benjamin, just to know that he was born. And she almost got to be buried with everybody else, except she didn't. So it's like she represents the almost. It almost worked out. And yet she is the one who God designates as Mother Rachel. She's considered the mother of all of the Jewish people, even though she's the mother of 2 and didn't even get to enjoy the second at all. She's considered the mother of the Jewish people. She is the one who says that Mama Rachel says she is crying for her children. And Prophet Jeremiah describes Rachel cries for her children. How long is she crying for children? Like, are you still crying for your children? It's like, didn't you give up crying for your children? She says, because they're not here. She's waiting for them to come back to the land of Israel. She's waiting for them. She didn't give up. She's still crying. We think, ay, Chaval, this poor woman, you mean you're still crying after all these thousands of years? But what does that tell you if somebody is still crying over a loss? I'm not recommending this as a way to go, because actually it's considered unhealthy in most loss situations. But Rachel crying over the loss of her children is considered a huge benefit, because as long as you're still crying, it means you didn't give up and you haven't accepted it and you're still waiting. This is not unlike Jacob when Joseph was sold by his brothers. It says Jacob refused to be comforted. Normally, you'd be like, a death of a child is a horrific thing, but you are supposed to accept comfort. Like when you go to a Shiva house, you say, Hamakom yinachem etchem, Hashem should comfort you. And it needs to go through a period. God gives you a gift to be able to move on with your life. Jacob, like, he didn't give up for like 22 years. It was like, no, he would not be comforted. Rachel refuses to be comforted. That's considered a good thing. When we observe Tisha B'Av, and we sit on the floor and we cry and we fast and we act as if we are in mourning for the destruction of the temples, as if it, so you're saying there's a defiance in refusing to be comforted. Yes, there's a defiance, but there's more than a defiance. Means that there is still a hope. The hope actually, I mean, you tend to think of like, no, you have a big problem. It's like, no, you was actually hopeful. So I don't know if this is, what's the word, apocryphal or true, but it says that Napoleon, that he came across on Tisha B'Av and he saw Jews sitting and crying on the floor for the loss of the temple. And he's like, what are they doing? And someone told him, he goes, if you're still crying, you'll go back because it means you didn't give up. Everybody else is like, get on with your life, you know? So adjust and go back to be wherever you are and just move on. It's like, no, the Jewish people do not move on. And Mordecai and Esther from the tribe of Benjamin, children of Rachel, the one who is sitting on the road, who is waiting and is still crying for her children. It says Mordecai did not give up on the Jewish people returning to the land of Israel, which is why he did not go to that party. And he would not bow down to Haman. And he goes, I am not participating in that. And he told the Jewish people, you shouldn't. Said Achashverosh was like really trying to rub it in. He made it a kosher event, kosher wine, kosher food, whatever you wanted, kosher, 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 kosher. But the whole event was treif. The whole thing was designed to get the Jewish people to give up. So interestingly, we have an allusion to Tisha B'Av on Purim as well. So what the line that is introduced when it talks about Mordecai, and it says, go back to where we were just reading, chapter 2, verse 5, which we read out loud about Mordecai, which is interesting because why should we all say this out loud? Like to read his lineage? It's because it's supposed to remind the Jewish people who he was and who we are. It's like, this is a little code. This is code. Rachel's child. Otherwise, why are you telling me all the way back to the tribe of Benjamin? Usually you say your name, the son or daughter of your father or your mother. That's it. You don't go back and back and back and say he was a Benjaminite. Why do I need to know he's a Benjaminite? Child of Rachel. And what does it say specifically about him then? Who had been exiled from Jerusalem along with the exiles who had been exiled with Jechoniah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had exiled. And that verse is read to the music, to the trup of Eicha, of Lamentations. So we're having Purim, and then we're like, wait a minute, what is this story really all about? It's about how the Jews forgot who they were, what they were supposed to be doing, what they were supposed to be longing for. And so we have a moment of lamentations in the middle of the Megillah. I can tell you as a former Megillah reader, which I didn't spend that much time doing that. One time I read and I was reading this part, and it's very hard to switch musical patterns, or at least I thought it was, because the Megillah is kind of more happy sound, and the Eicha is similar but different. And I got into the Eicha and I couldn't get out of it. But luckily, where I was reading, there was so much talking, nobody noticed it except another Megillah reader. He goes, "Saw you didn't get yourself out of Eicha, did you?" I'm like, I couldn't. I was like in a rut. I couldn't step out of it. So, but we have this, and it goes from Purim into Eicha, back to the regular Megillah reading, because we need to know who is Mordecai. Why do we need to know this specifically about him? He came with the exiles. Well, hello, so did everybody else who was there. This wasn't just Mordecai. All the other Jewish people, how do you think they were in Shushan and in Persia to begin with? They all were exiled. So it's a little reminder, remember who you are. Why all these little hints in the Megillah? So one of the things we need to remember is we know that God's name is not mentioned in the Megillah, and that's just one of the things for us to know. A second is the Megillah was written by Mordecai and Esther while they were subjects of King Ahasuerus. What does that tell us? Have you ever heard of censorship? This had to be written in a way that was code for the Jews and would not offend the king. So there's all sorts of things that are said, but that are not said, words that are used, melodies that are chanted. Okay, King Ahasuerus is not going to hear the melody. He doesn't know the difference between Eicha and just like the other people. He doesn't know the difference between the Eicha melody and the Megillah melody. But there are going to be messages that are embedded in the text to remind the Jewish people what it is they are supposed to be doing without saying anything offensive, which I find fascinating. And Jewish people have all sorts of code words. We don't even realize we have code. Sometimes people post things that are kind of a joke of saying, if you said these things to any other person, they would have no idea what you were talking about. If I said to you, Passover is late this year, and you said that to a non-Jew who's like, what does that mean? What if I say Christmas is late? It's like, that has no meaning. That doesn't mean anything. But for a Jewish, everyone knows what that means when Passover is late. I know what that means. So it's not like you have to be like a big scholar. You just have to be kind of in the know as a Jewish person. Very generally, you would know. So the Jewish people, you hear this melody, you hear that the lineage of Mordechai is being given out down to Benjamin, you know exactly what's happening. And it is a huge reminder. And we're told that unlike the Torah reading, which we are supposed to pay attention to every single word of the Torah reading, yes, but the Megillah reading more so. You have to hear every word. You have to hear every word. One of the reasons being is because there's this kind of code in here. And if you're not paying attention, you're going to miss what's going on and not be able to really deeply follow it. So in all of this, we have Mordechai and Esther, who are under the king and are subjects of the king and leaders of the Jewish people at the same time. As we see the Jewish people in our world today, we are leaders and we are subjects at the same time. And how do you navigate that? Like, well, you first of all have to have your head put on clearly, and you follow Mordechai. What did Mordechai do? He dressed in royal garb. He dressed in royal garb, which is part of what made the Jewish people happy, because it said how it was that he went out. Hold a second, I just lost it. He left the king's presence in royal apparel of turquoise and white with a large gold crown and a robe of fine linen and purple. So what does that mean, that clothing? It says that clothing is the clothing of someone who is dignified and who is royalty. We didn't know if he was going to be surviving the would-be massacre or not. But how do you go out into the world? That expresses a level of self-confidence, of awareness of purpose, focus, identity, mission. All of that is embedded, saying that through your clothes. I'm dressed as royalty. The Jewish people are a mamlechet kohanim. We are a kingdom, we are royalty, and we are supposed to conduct ourselves as such. Even in the presence of danger, even in the presence of threat, even in the presence of all of these things, we have to at least remember who we are. I think there was a story, I don't know if it was during the Holocaust or World War II, I'm not sure, somebody who had been a captain of the whatever, somehow managed to still have his uniform. And every morning he would take off his prison garb, his, concentration camp garb. He still had his uniform, and he put on his uniform to just be in it, to start the day, to remind himself who he was, even though he had to take it off and put on whatever it was that the world was making him wear. It's like, we're the ones who need to know. So this is looking at the Mordechai and Esther who are inside of each one of us, that we have to bring them out. And we know that not only were they royalty in Ahasuerus's camp, but they were real royalty because Mordechai was a descendant of King Saul. Mordechai is a descendant of King Saul, which meant that Mordechai's brother was a descendant of King Saul, which meant that Esther is a descendant of King Saul. So they are actually a royal family. And then you think, how unfair is that a royal family has to be under the thumb of this Persian king. Like, hello world, this is where we're at. So I'm saying this could not be a more real story. This is the most real story that we have, is Purim going into this. So we have Rachel, we have her children. She is crying for her children. She does not forget them. She is waiting for them to come back. In fact, I learned this, I didn't know this either. It says that if you're going from Jerusalem and you're going to go traveling to the cave of Machpelah to go see the matriarchs and patriarchs, says you are really obligated to stop at Rachel's tomb as well. You're obligated to go there. And many people go there before they leave the country and when they come back, to stop and say hello to your mother who is waiting for you. Just like call your mother when you can, before you leave and when you get back. Just call and say you're there. It's like, because Mama Rachel is waiting for us. The light and the honor that the Jewish people had. Let's take a look at, it says that they had it before the battle. So it's like, when did they start getting the light? When was it available to them? When was that light and that joy, when was that available to them? It was really available to them from the very beginning. It was there for them to access, even when they were at the party, King Ahasuerus' party. At the time, they didn't see it. At the time, they didn't tap into it. At the time, they ignored it. At the time, it was practically not there. A little bit like when Hagar was in the desert with Ishmael after they got sent away from Abraham's home. And it said that Ishmael was, dying of thirst or whatever. It says, then the angels opened Hagar's eyes and she saw there was a well right there. It's right there. What do we need to do? We need to open our eyes and see it. We need to open our eyes and see the fabulous tradition that we have. Judaism, our culture, the laws, our holidays. It's a privilege to have so much to engage in. It's like, it's right here. We just need to take it in and embrace it. So it was there from the very beginning. And God was setting in motion the salvation as the Jewish people were sinning. So how do we know this? Let's go back to the beginning of the Megillah. What happens at the beginning of the Megillah? We may not even, let's go back to the beginning. Page 1252. Hold on one second. Okay. Page 1252. And it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. So this opening part is where he has the party. What do we know at the party that happens that he asks Vashti, his queen, what does he ask her to do? So he asks her to come and present herself basically just wearing her crown. So there's a whole lot to say about that, which we'll discuss another time. But the first thing that happens here is that Vashti is going to be taken out of the picture. Now, this is really strange because Ahasuerus married Vashti for political reasons. Not only was she absolutely beautiful, but she was the granddaughter of King Nebuchadnezzar. And Ahasuerus didn't have so much yichus to him. He wasn't so important, but he married somebody important. He married Vashti. So for him to kill her was really a bizarre move. But it needed to happen because who needs to be put on the scene? Esther. So Esther comes on the scene. So Vashti is out and Esther is in. What else happens? It says that the other thing that happens is that once Esther comes in, that Mordecai is going to hear about a plot to assassinate Ahasuerus. And he's going to tell Esther, and Esther is going to tell Ahasuerus, and Ahasuerus is going to record it, but he's not going to remember it until later. But it puts in place who? It puts in place Mordecai to be remembered in the future at just the right moment. Esther's in place. So this reminds me of a chess game. which I don't play very well. I can't imagine what it takes to do that. First, we need to get Esther in. We need to get Mordecai in the good graces of the king. And then and this is while the Jews are sinning. So it's like, while you're sinning, I'm setting things up for your redemption, just to let you know. Okay, so this is what God is doing. It's like, this is so nice to be like, you know what? Until you shape up, I'm not doing anything for you. It's like, that's not how God works. Even while we are in the process of doing what we're not supposed to do, forgetting to do what we are supposed to do, God is like, I'm still setting it up for the redemption. And so what happens that we see that before Haman comes on the scene, it says, then we get that, then after that, it is when Haman comes on the scene. Chapter 3 it's not until chapter 3 that Haman comes on the scene, page 1254. And it specifically says, chapter 3, verse 1, after these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman. And then it gives his lineage. And then it talks about that Mordecai then is not going to bow down. But after what things? It's like, after these things that God put in place while the Jewish people were doing what they weren't supposed to do and not doing what they were supposed to do, God had set it up. Okay, now we can bring Haman on the scene, and now the story can actually start. So there's a discussion. There's actually a discussion in the Talmud about, where do we have to start the story? Where do we really have to start the Megillah? Do we really need to have all this preliminary stuff? Do I really need to know about Vashti? It's kind of unseemly. I don't really need to know about that. Like, maybe we should start when Mordecai is introduced. Like, maybe that's where we should, or maybe just when Esther is introduced. So Rabbi Meir, it says you have to start where we actually start. You have to start at the place where the Jewish people are at their lowest, doing the worst, and participating in this disaster. You have to start there, because that's when God is actually starting to put the places into the redemption, and we don't see it until it's going to manifest later. So this is the message for us. It's like, we look around the world today and we're like, oy vey, like, look at everything that's going on. So what are we supposed to think? It's like, yes, and Layehudim haita or v'simcha v'sason vikar. For the Jewish people, there was light. God was there. The light was there. The honor was there. The joy was there. We were not tuned into it, but it was there. And it's in progress as this all is unfolding. We don't see it yet. And we say, Kain Tiyeh Lanu, so may it be for us, that as we are doing or not doing what we're supposed to be doing or not doing, may God also be arranging and setting the stage in so many ways for all of us for our ultimate redemption. It's not going to be just out of the blue. It's in progress now. We have been, and we talked about this, and we'll conclude, that we have 3 holidays of redemption that started with Tu B'Shvat. We have Tu B'Shvat, and then we have this year 8 weeks later, but normally it would be 4 weeks later. We have Purim, and then 4 weeks later, we have Pesach. We have the very, very, very internal, I can't even see anything happening, to Purim, where I see things happening, but it's a little strange, and I can't quite figure it out, what's happening and who's pulling the strings here, to the final redemption of Pesach, where it is like totally, completely revealed. But all these things is like, it's a process. And interestingly, what happened is, after the Purim events, in the most bizarre way, Ahasuerus and Esther have a child. They have a son, and that son is the one who gives permission for the Jewish people to go back to rebuild the second temple. You're like, well, I didn't see that coming. Where'd that come from? It's like, because things happen in very strange ways that we cannot predict or understand. So we're responsible for the light, the illumination, the clarity of thinking, remembering what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to focus on that and let God take care of everything else, because we can't even anticipate what the other things are. So with that, we will come, God willing, we will start with tomorrow with our bringing the Jewish people together, the most powerful thing we can do, affirming the unity of the Jewish people, affirming the unity of God. We are all one. That is the basis of our strength. We have the benefit of having a Shabbos, which always is something powerful for the Jewish people to engage in. And someone said the benefit is that we're not going into Purim hungry. Usually we're fasting and then we go to the Megillah reading. It's like, can we move this along because I need to eat? But we're fasting tomorrow. So by Saturday night, we should not really be so hungry. And we can really focus on the Megillah and take that in and celebrate and have our Suda, our celebration, and recognize that they celebrated even while they were in exile, even while still under Ahasuerus, even with Esther still living, with a whatever kind of a person, an evil person. It's like you celebrate the accomplishments that we have along the way. We're almost there. It's kimat. It's almost. We are like Rachel. I almost got to marry Jacob first. I almost got to enjoy my child. I almost got to be buried. They're almost coming home. They're not here yet. So we hang on to the ability to hang in with a long, long journey. Hashem should bring it to a swift conclusion and literally bring us all home and bring Mashiach and have the full for all of us as soon as possible, like today.
Hi, Ellen, I have a question. Actually, it's a couple. One is kind of interesting that these patterns keep happening because you can, with the Jewish people, and it seems like there's all these patterns. How do we break the pattern? Maybe that's something we need to do in the future or now.
Yes, now is good.
Yeah. The other thing is I'm not quite sure what you mean that in Israel, in Jerusalem, in there, we are still in exile. I don't get it.
Okay, so it's interesting. We are physically in the land of Israel, and we have a lot of things that we can do. There are a lot of mitzvot that are called talui al haaretz, about being in the land of Israel, like the laws of Shemitah, etc. But when Mashiach comes, is like one of the main things that will change is that we do not answer to any other governments or foreign powers. That the Jewish people can do what they want to do. They don't have to answer. They're not dependent or reliant on other powers for anything. So that we're clearly not there yet. We've got a host of people who are telling us what to do that shapes what it does. We will also have, there will also be a king that will be run according to the Torah. The Jewish people, like lots of things will be happening differently. So it's considered that we're still in exile, that we are still, even though we are, obviously it's much better being here because it's our homeland. But we are not there yet. That's why in the synagogues, when we say the prayer for Israel, we say Reshit Smichat Geulatenu. It is the beginning of the flowering of redemption. We do not say that we are already done. We're not there yet. We are still in progress. Even the fact that we don't go up to the Temple Mount, we don't have a Beit HaMikdash. Be like if someone said you can go home to your family, but you have to stop at the gate and you can look in at your parents having their dinner at the dining room table, but you can look in the window, but you can't go in. You wouldn't say, well, I went home to visit my family. It was great. I'm like, oh, what'd they say? Like, well, I didn't really go in. I got to go to the fence. And you'd be like, well, that's nice. You got that far, but it's kimat. It's not exactly the whole story. So we're not there yet. We have a lot more to go, but we're getting closer. And we said this is a process and it does have an end. It is not endless and it is not forever. It's long. And we're actually the generations, these generations, if we go on the 6,000 year plan and we're in 5784, we're getting there. There's a lot of challenges on the way. And just like the Jewish people experienced obstacles and conflict of people attacking them before they received the Torah and before they entered the land of Israel, that when we are almost there, it actually, there's going to be more objection and more opposition the closer we get to the finish line. That's the nature of it. Even think about yourself, like when you have a goal and you have a lot of beginning energy and you're like, whatever. And then like right before you get done, something happens. And they have a saying for this, for people who are working on PhDs. It's called ABD, all but dissertation. You got through all the coursework, you got your BA, you got your master's, you did your work, you can't quite get the dissertation done. And you have 1,000 reasons. I remember even when I was working on my master's thesis, I kept wanting to do research, and my master's, my thesis advisor said, stop doing research and start writing. I'm like, but no, there's more to, he goes, there will always be more. You need to stop and start writing. But I don't like writing. So I was like more interested in doing research. So that dynamic is part of the fabric of creation, that there is that when something powerful is about to happen, there is an opposing force that is in the world as well. And so if we want to judge, so here's something to think about. If we want to judge how close we are to really getting to where we need to be by the vociferousness and the strength of the opposing force, we must be getting really, really close. Because it's really strong. So yes, more honey, more bees. Exactly. More honey, more bees. So yeah. Interesting. So everyone, you should be blessed and have a meaningful, truly meaningful Purim, and really get to focus on what we are celebrating and enjoy it, to be besimcha. And like we are marbin besimcha. You could say, I can't really be so happy because like we're still in exile, things are still not so great. It's like they are great for what they are supposed to be right now. And that is what we are celebrating. So as I said, we can have terror attacks and go shopping for Purim goodies all at the same breath, and it's mind-boggling. It is really truly mind-boggling. You don't need to get drunk because it's kind of a drunken experience to have this. So God willing, we shall have the final redemption and all the Hamans in our world and life for all of humanity's benefit, not just for us. Can you imagine if all these people would just like disappear, or at least put away their arms? The world would be at a much higher level.
Yes.
Yeah. So, Bezrat Hashem, we'll do our part. I'll be with you in mind and spirit at some point in time tomorrow. Have an easy fast, a meaningful fast, and wonderful Shabbos and Purim, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
All right.
Happy
Thank
you.
and peace.
was amazing.
Definitely.
Thank you so much. It was fantastic.
My pleasure.
Always elevate us.